I once came off a 2-day strategy workshop. At the end of it, everyone was excited about the initiatives that were identified and the decisions that were taken in that workshop. It was a very high quality leadership gathering and some phenomenal ideas were proposed, and everyone was quite stoked by what came out of that exercise. There was clarity in decisions, priorities were very clearly aligned. But 6 months later, almost nothing had changed. Not because the decisions were wrong, but the execution was never designed. That's why I say decision making is easy. It is the execution where strategy dies. I built a simple mind map to explore this idea, and I hope you will find this relevant to the strategic challenges that you're battling in your own organization. Let's dive right into it. Let's look at what the core problem that we are battling. We simply assume that decisions equal to results. We believe that a robust management dialogue where ideas were proposed and decisions were arrived at, we assume that it's going to translate into results. But that's not the reality. The strategy fails at that point in time after the decisions are arrived at. Why? Because execution is never designed. Because what typically tends to happen is that people come to these strategy discussions, great ideas are discussed, but when they go back to their workplaces, they have to battle their everyday priorities, keeping customers happy, fulfilling their obligations, or whatever the core responsibility within those functional areas are. Despite the best intent, execution does not happen. The point I want to emphasize here is that agreement does not mean execution. The key lesson here is that a decision without execution clarity is simply hope. Let's dive into what the leader's role is in navigating the strategy execution journey. First things first, a leader is one who is able to perceive the threat beforehand. My father used to narrate this experience of witnessing his CEO as a young engineer working for the automotive industry years ago, way back in the 80s. He would say his CEO would come into a meeting and tell his management team that I see a storm brewing on the horizon. This was a time when the monopoly was being gradually taken away from few players and when there was a tectonic shift in the industry. The CEO could see the threat brewing on the horizon, but the next in line leadership team did not see it that way. They were very happy because the business was profitable. They had a small portfolio of products and everything was fine. Because of this disconnect between the CEO's vision and the next in line leadership team not able to see eye to eye, meant that the true sense of urgency was not being created. The lesson here is that the leadership begins with a constructive discomfort. Everyone has to emotionally feel the need for the change. If this does not happen, then any strategy, no matter how well documented or how well articulated it is, remains a piece of paper that never gets actioned upon. The other bit is that let's assume that the team does believe in the strategy. Let's assume for a moment that everyone understands and agrees what needs to be done. In itself, it does not imply that it will translate into action, because we must appreciate the inherent difficulty associated with converting strategies into actions. It is akin to changing the wheel of a car while it is running on the expressway. It requires dexterity, not heroics. Execution is a design problem, not a motivation problem, which means if we have not put serious thought into how we design the execution framework for strategies, it will simply remain an intent, never get translated into meaningful actions. How do leaders make execution work? There are different levers to crank here, and by no means I'm going to go into all of them. But I have taken the liberty to touch upon some of the common issues or themes that you need to consider while driving strategy execution in your organization. First things first is that you need to make strategy a real priority. By this, what I mean is that strategy often ends up being the last priority because neither time nor resources are allocated towards strategies. You may have heard of Google, which famously allocates 20% or encourages its employees to allocate 20% of their time, that is one day in a week, to do things that are nothing to do with business as usual. You may not need to go to extreme measures like that, but make it clear in communication and goal setting that people's time need to be allocated or balanced between business as usual and strategy execution. And the other word of caution is that don't boil the ocean. Especially when you embark on strategy execution journey, it could be very tempting for you to go after any and every issue that emerges, because they all have potential and it could be very tempting for us to go after all of them at once. Here, you may risk wearing yourself thin, spreading out your resources and not getting too far. This is where I recommend that pick up the vital 20% issues. You may do a gut check. For example, in your organization, you can look at the customer journeys and customer touch points the various interfaces for the customer with our organization, and ask the question, how's the customer experience? Are we doing better than the competitors? Is there a disruptor in the industry who's going to fundamentally shift the industry paradigm? And you could pick up core issues that matter to the customer and start fixing them with the aim of getting early wins. My recommendation is, especially in the first 4 to 5 months, limit the scope to about 8 or 10 issues, key issues that matter to the business, to the customer, and where you can achieve some meaningful outcomes. The other point you need to consider is answering what's in it for me. This is an acronym we came across years ago when we were driving transformation in a global logistics industry. What it simply means is that it is not that people will not take action if they are not rewarded or incentivized. That's not what it means. What it means is that there has to be some personal angle. If I am expected to go the extra mile over and above my core job duties, there has to be some element of reciprocity from the organization. It could be in the form of a simple letter of appreciation. One of our clients had a tradition where every team that successfully completed a project would be invited to have lunch with the management team in the executive chambers. That was something for them to look forward to. So it could be a very small gesture just to highlight the importance of the initiative and to make the employee feel valued about contributing to these initiatives. Build a simple execution governance, don't overcomplicate it. Not too many committees and not too many layers of governance. You need to breathe life into each initiative, which means that there has to be a sponsor or an owner for that initiative. There has to be a person who is accountable for the execution and the outcomes of those initiatives. There will be a lot of decision points that have to be given quickly so that we don't stymie the progress. Answering these questions become crucial. You need to execute the team with simple tools to solve problems effectively. Simple problem solving tools, templates, simple education on A3 methods and DMAIC frameworks, so that you're not overcomplicating the whole approach of problem solving, but at the same time give the team a simple roadmap, a simple set of templates so that there is a consistent way they go about. They know the start to end journey of problem solving and they don't get lost in the woods. The other key point to consider is that you need to decide fast. Whenever there is a decision delay, it kills enthusiasm. If the team needs approval, they need to make a small purchase or they need to try out a new idea or a policy needs to be changed, stakeholders need to be engaged. These need to be done very quickly. The sooner we execute, the better it is for us. The lesson here is that momentum comes from clarity and completion, right? Nothing begets success as success. There has to be strong reinforcement and motivation levers. There has to be clearly defined ways to recognize teams. There has to be clear visibility of the leadership role, their line of sight on these initiatives, their active involvement, their encouragement of the teams, and also being there when the teams are hitting a roadblock, supporting them in a safe environment, celebrating progress, and so on. The lesson here is that what leaders recognize gets repeated. In closing, I'd like to leave the following thoughts with you. Execution needs discipline. More importantly, execution needs thought put into it. You need to put serious thought into how you are going to execute those strategies. Otherwise, it remains a wish list. Leaders underestimate the importance of follow through. Leadership theatrics does not mean leadership impact. I have already covered what meaningful actions leaders could take so that it's not just a visible leadership, but it also emotionally gets connected with the team that is executing the initiative so that they feel truly motivated and inspired to contribute to the organization. So the key lesson here is that strategy is what gets done, not just what gets announced. I hope you found this video meaningful. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on what you felt and perhaps your own challenges on executing strategies. Let's engage in the comments. Thank you for your attention.